Well, in the name of fighting off an invasion force, because bear in mind, in our particular LARP here, in this fantasy that we're constructing for YouTube, we're being invaded right now. There's new hybrids being placed into our society right now that are fumbling and bumbling around for some purpose that they're not even aware of. They simply follow orders, because in a telepathic society, your mind is not your own. Whoever is on the ultimate chain of command in this hierarchy is controlling it all. And that turns out to be these insect beings who are not like us. And they're a pain in the ass to everybody. I've talked to this one guy when I was on mescaline. And this guy I talked to a couple of times at this particular space. And this being was hominid, but they didn't have language as we understand it. They were also telepathic, but they were telepathic through their vagus nervous system, which produced a shimmering photo biophotons that left their skin to show what their emotions were. And that's how they communicated. And that's how they talked among themselves, was that they would send signal. They would just feel something and it would come on out, and they could have complex patterns all over their skin with this stuff. And it was like us talking in words, only exactly so, only it wasn't audible, it was visual. And these guys, that guy, whatever the hell that species was called, which was way off. I mean, it was way off. Not local fellows at all. And they had problems with the bugs. And they have a real problem with the bugs because they were very telepathic when they first encountered the bugs, and the bugs tried to do their field control, neuropathy kind of thing. So the bugs show up and they assume they're the top dog. They assume they're going to be able to dominate everybody. They're attracted by high psychic planets like ours. Because we're just exuding psychic energy. And in their experience, that exusion of psychic energy means minds that are not controlled enough, and so they can tap right in and work their way, right? So I think we have to, as humans, we got to get crafty. We've got to be sneaky about this. Our military, I think, is desperately involved with this. Only it's not a war where we've got, F-15s trying to shoot down UFOs in the skies like Independence Day. Okay, it's not that kind of war. It's a war of them tracking abductees. It's a war of them compiling vast amounts of information on who's doing what, where, and why, so that they can infer what these aliens are doing. It makes so much sense of the giant data modeling that's going on, and the giant data mining that's going on minute activities that don't make any sense as to why the government should care about a lot of this stuff, right? But as soon as you pop into this one little thing, oh, well, we're in the midst of an alien invasion. Yeah, it then helps to know who's buying what in quantity, and how they're paying for it, and where the flow of goods is going, and all of these kind of things. Because in that example I gave you earlier of the apartment building in Germany, where the guy owned the apartment building, and he was stuck with the water bill, and he was stuck with that sewer bill because it wasn't paid those 3 months, even though they told him they would be responsible for the utilities. Then they wrote him out a check and all of that. It was just fantasy. They never actually had any money put into the system, yet goods went there and resources went there, and they were consumed and taken away. So if we have deficits in our accounts matching up, then you can track things by those deficits. Where is material disappearing? What kind of material is it? And some of the strange stuff that's going on. So see, all of this kind of stuff are weapons within our human battle against these aliens, because these people, the military, our US military, the Chinese, the Russians, to a certain extent, the British, to a certain extent, the Australians, to a huge extent, the military in Malaysia and Indonesia, these guys are very much involved in this war against these invading space aliens. But they can't go and round people up, for instance, that they suspect are hybrids, because we don't know what the space aliens will do, and we need to know what they're doing and what their plan is before we try and disrupt it, because we cannot shoot them out of the sky. We don't have that level of power at this stage. They have some level of technology that we can't even guess at. So one of the things is they form the characteristics of their spaceships with their mind. Yet the spaceship is solid. It's nuts and bolts in a sense, right? It may be little tiny particles that are all linked together that simply respond to the thought waves that these guys give them, and it'll form a chair right out of the wall for you. these kind of deals, right? So actually, these sorts of elements told to us by abductees, when we place it within the context of the questions that the hybrids ask, it makes a lot of sense. So the hybrids are curious about the clutter. They're curious about all the cables in your room. Okay, what are those cables for? What do they do? How are they made? Why is it necessary? Why does that machine have to have a cable to get electricity? Why does it have to have a cable to get to a connection to go online? Because they don't have that in the spaceships, because the spaceship itself, to some degree, participates in supplying all of these needs. So there is no need for a cable. If you needed, for instance, to charge your phone, you just stick it on the wall or set it on the floor or whatever, and the ship would charge it for you. That kind of a thing, right?
That's fascinating, and it makes sense. And it makes me think that that's another reason maybe they are looking for stuff in these DNA kits. Used to be $100. Now they're even offering a special right now, $49.95. Send in your DNA and they'll tell you exactly where you come from. Imagine getting a knock on the door. Clif, open the door.
No, it's not working that way though. They know all about us though. See, but see, right. I'm a military brat, so they probably have got me scoped out so many ways. All of us were used for all different kinds of experiments that I now think are part of this. And actually, if you were really to ask me, Clif, what do you think the secret societies come from? You know, I would say the Egyptians and all of these guys, every single one of the secret societies we've got going back through China, Japan, US, Mongolia, all of these secret societies relate to the fact that 1,000 years ago, we were being invaded by aliens and there was a need to respond to them. And they knew the aliens were making hybrids. They didn't call them that, but fake humans, doppelgangers, personas, all of these various different words. They knew that they had slaves that they called fairies or elves or gnomes. They knew that they used these slaves to abduct people and take children and stuff. And I think the secret societies were a way of holding knowledge among people that could be vetted to be human. That's why the DNA bloodline, right? Because a lot of that and a lot of the secret societies excluded anybody that had ever been abducted. And as part of the initiation process, you were kept within the first 3 ranks of Masonry if you were part of a clan that had abductions. Only if you were not, were you allowed to rise up. Now, it was later taken over. The whole Masonic thing was taken over by the elites, who may well be abductees themselves. But this brings us back to several different other kinds of things in history. The coneheads, the fact that we had conehead pharaohs, and we had coneheads in Europe that ruled all the way through from the 800s all the way into the 1500s. You would see portraits of all the rulers of the various different kingdoms and principalities and so on, with coneheads, no hair, weird headdresses trying to disguise it, etc. And they died out. Okay, maybe they were an attempt by the insects to make a hybrid that could rule us directly. And it didn't happen, right? We're hard to get along with as psychic beings. We cause a lot of the more telepathic kind of beings a great deal of pain to be around us because we're so psychically chaotic. And we love it. You know, nothing better than a good dust up, in my opinion. You know, chaos in its primal form, where nothing is known about the outcome. That does not suit these insects at all. When I was doing these mescaline journeys, and with me, mescaline was the drug I took for far journeys to this other space. Psilocybin could also get you there, but you had to go through the environment as opposed to a direct. So it was like, it was psilocybin, you were walking along the train track and you would eventually get there. But with mescaline, you were riding a train right to the destination, and you just didn't even bother with the environment on either side. But when I interacted with the insects, I was appalled that anything could exist that had no emotion like that. They were annoyed at me. I was interrupting this older one's experiments with whatever the hell he was doing, and he couldn't get rid of me. And I was just intrigued enough to stay there because it was one of my very first far journey experiences. And so I stayed there and annoyed him. And to be fair, you know, I'm kind of a raspy personality with an authority complex. And so he pissed me off. I have an emotional response. So it was like, up yours, I'm staying. Now the younger insect, I learned a great deal from him because he was very chatty. He was perhaps only several hundred years old, whereas the other guy might have been several tens of thousands of years old, as far as I know. He was ancient, especially in his thinking. The young guy wasn't more hip or more aware of things. He was just more curious because he hadn't filled his knowledge banks up, or its knowledge banks up, right? And so we interacted, and I soon learned that in that space, if you just give, you're not going to get anything. Okay. So it's a trade, it's transactional. So if he wanted to know something, I would demand an answer to a question from him. And so he tumbled to that real quick, and we got along pretty famously. And so when I later on met the guy with the emotions on top of his skin, which didn't mean anything to me, and we communicated telepathically with words, I knew it was transactional. And so I did business with him, asking him tons of questions, learned lots of stuff that actually led to the formation of much of my software related to predictive linguistics. Because this guy with his emotional sheen was all about how emotions work and how the vagus nervous system works and how the linguistic center is tied into it and through the glands of the heads and all of this information. He was just full of it, because all hominids, once you reach a certain level of vagus nervous system development, are very, very, very similar, even if the outside cage is different, right? He had more of a square head. He had like this, not like Klingon or anything kind of a thing, but like a big sartorial ridge depth. I mean, it was a dent that separated the two parts. So he was very pleasant looking, but solid and sort of brutish in that sense, right? Now, also, we have to acknowledge that in this space, we project and build our bodies with our minds. And so you can't do fine detail, still pay attention, still be stoned on the psychedelic, and still learn things. So you project out sort of what you look like, right? Because it was rude to not do that. But if you wanted to be there and not do that, you're just a big sphere. It's just your mind in a big sphere looking around, examining, and so on. And then you can extrude your body out of that sphere, as this guy did. And he and I had a couple of conversations, maybe as many as 9 or 10 over the course of a year or more. Um, it was either the same being, or the guy was like, the being that I dealt with each time knew what I'd talked with the other being with. So they may telepathically, he may have shared the conversation with everybody, and they all just sort of looked alike. And that's another thing about the insects. They all look alike. They're all third order beings. You can't tell one from another. Facial expressions, they don't have them. Their faces all look alike. They're just slightly larger, slightly bigger, but they're basically the same mold over and over and over again. And
Do
they
you
are
think there's something making them?
That's the whole thing. See, I can't say anything about their origin because they don't talk about it. Even the young one wouldn't answer questions about their species that might betray things that he thought would make their species vulnerable. So he knew I was an enemy long before I knew I was an enemy. Because when I was interacting with him, I had no concept of the invasion going on Earth, the fact that these bugs were here on Earth. I wasn't talking to a bug that was here on Earth. I was talking to a bug that was in this alternate space. They may have actually had their corporeal bodies back here as I did, but I have no way of knowing that one way or another. And he didn't give any indication that he was a bug from Earth, but he did give me an indication that I now recognize was that he was wary of me, and he was wary of disclosing things. But you know, the thing about psychedelic use, for those of us that do achieve shamanic levels, right? And so you didn't smoke anywhere near enough divinorum to achieve a shamanic level. You reached the level of the dissolution of the body, and you did not go any further. You've got to take a lot of the stuff, and you've got to go through that. Your body has to die on you, and this is what gets most people that use these psychedelics, is they can't take that, okay? Because your body dissolves, and your mind is quite convinced that your body is dead, and it is the most horrific kind of feeling, both for liberation and for hellish mortality that you can ever imagine. And having done it, I would never undo it, but each and every time it is fantastically difficult to get through that stage, and you never did. Okay, so the shamanic level of these kind of things take you beyond that level of dissolution, and you get into an entirely different space. And so, but it's curious that a lot of the activities in that space are being conducted by and replicating much of the same kind of energies that we find down here on Earth, so to speak.